Welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the minds that shaped how power operates in our world. Today we're exploring two giants of strategic thinking who approach leadership from completely different cultural perspectives, yet both created frameworks that the most successful people today still use to build empires, navigate politics, and achieve what others consider impossible. On one side, we have Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese military strategist whose Art of War was written over 2,500 years ago but remains the most studied strategy book in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. On the other side stands Niccolò Machiavelli, the Italian Renaissance thinker whose name became synonymous with cunning political maneuvering and whose insights into power dynamics still guide world leaders today. What makes this comparison fascinating isn't just the geographical divide between East and West, but how two brilliant minds separated by centuries arrived at both remarkably similar and strikingly different conclusions about how to gain, maintain, and exercise power effectively. The Eastern wisdom, Sun Tzu's holistic approach. Sun Tzu's philosophy emerges from a culture that values harmony, long-term thinking, and the interconnectedness of all things. When he wrote The Art of War, he wasn't just creating a military manual. He was developing a comprehensive philosophy of conflict resolution that prioritizes winning without fighting, understanding your environment completely, and achieving victory through superior preparation and positioning rather than brute force. The core principle that separates Sun Tzu from Western strategic thinking is his emphasis on winning before the battle even begins. He famously wrote, "The supreme excellence is to subdue the enemy without fighting." This isn't about avoiding conflict out of weakness, but about being so thoroughly prepared, so strategically positioned, and so aware of all variables that your victory becomes inevitable before any direct confrontation occurs. Consider how Jeff Bezos applied this principle when building Amazon. Rather than directly competing with established retailers in traditional ways, Bezos positioned Amazon in the emerging digital space where traditional retailers were weak. He didn't fight Barnes and Noble on their turf of physical bookstores. Instead, he created an entirely new battlefield where he had every advantage. By the time traditional retailers realized what was happening, Amazon had already won the war for online retail dominance. Sun Tzu's approach emphasizes what he calls knowing yourself and knowing your enemy. This goes far deeper than surface-level intelligence gathering. It requires understanding your own capabilities, limitations, motivations, and blind spots with brutal honesty. Simultaneously, it demands developing such complete awareness of your competition, market, or opponents that you can predict their moves before they make them. Warren Buffett exemplifies this principle perfectly. His investment success comes not from trying to outsmart the market through complex strategies, but from thoroughly understanding both his own investment philosophy and the fundamental nature of the businesses he invests in. He spends years studying companies, understanding their competitive advantages, management quality, and market positions before making investments. When he finally acts, it's with such complete information that the outcome seems almost predetermined. The Eastern approach also emphasizes flexibility and adaptation. Sun Tzu wrote about being like water, taking the shape of your container while maintaining your essential nature. This means having core principles that never change while adapting your tactics to whatever situation you face. Look at how Elon Musk operates across multiple industries. His core principle remains consistent, advancing humanity's capabilities and ensuring our species' long-term survival. But his tactics vary dramatically depending on the field. In electric vehicles, he focused on creating desirable luxury products first, then scaling down to mass market. In space exploration, he emphasized reusability and cost reduction. In social media with Twitter, he took a completely different approach focused on rapid transformation and free speech principles. Same core mission, completely different tactical approaches based on the specific challenges of each domain. The Western pragmatism, Machiavelli's realistic power dynamics. Machiavelli represents a fundamentally different approach to power, one that emerged from the chaotic political landscape of Renaissance Italy where city-states constantly warred with each other and survival often depended on making hard choices quickly. His famous work, The Prince, wasn't written as a moral guide but as a practical manual for leaders who needed to maintain power in a world where idealism often led to destruction. The core insight that makes Machiavelli so relevant to modern leaders is his recognition that good intentions without effective power often result in no positive change at all. He argued that a leader who loses power due to excessive virtue becomes unable to protect their people or implement beneficial policies. Therefore, Effective leadership sometimes requires making morally ambiguous decisions to maintain the power necessary to do good overall. This principle shows up constantly in modern business and politics. Steve Jobs was known for his demanding, sometimes harsh management style. He would publicly criticize employees, demand seemingly impossible standards, and make decisions that hurt people's feelings. Yet this approach enabled him to maintain the exacting standards that made Apple products revolutionary. His willingness to be the bad guy, when necessary, allowed him to create products that improved millions of lives and built one of the world's most valuable companies. Machiavelli also understood that perception often matters more than reality in power dynamics. He wrote extensively about how leaders must manage their image and reputation as carefully as they manage their actual policies. This isn't about deception for its own sake, but about understanding that people make decisions based on their perceptions, and effective leaders must account for this reality. Consider how Oprah Winfrey built her media empire. She understood that her audience needed to perceive her as authentic, relatable, and trustworthy. Every decision about her public image, from her choice of topics to discuss, to how she dressed, to which products she endorsed, was carefully calculated to maintain this perception. This wasn't manipulation, but strategic authenticity. She genuinely cared about her audience, but she also understood that expressing this care in ways her audience could recognize and relate to was crucial for building the platform that allowed her to make a positive impact. The Machiavellian approach also emphasizes timing and opportunity. He believed that successful leaders must be ready to act decisively when circumstances align in their favor, even if this means taking significant risks. This contrasts with the Sun Tzu approach of creating ideal conditions before acting. Mark Cuban demonstrates this principle consistently. Throughout his career, he's shown a willingness to make bold moves when he sees opportunities, from selling his first company Broadcast.com at the height of the dot-com boom to making unconventional investments on Shark Tank. He doesn't wait for perfect conditions. Instead, he analyzes situations quickly and acts when he believes the potential rewards justify the risks. The synthesis: how modern leaders combine both approaches. The most successful modern leaders don't choose between Eastern and Western approaches to power and strategy. Instead, they synthesize insights from both traditions, using Sun Tzu's emphasis on preparation and positioning alongside Machiavelli's understanding of power dynamics and decisive action. Take the example of how Reed Hastings transformed Netflix from a DVD by mail service into a global streaming giant. The Sun Tzu elements are evident in his long-term strategic thinking. He saw the future of entertainment moving digital long before most of his competitors and began positioning Netflix accordingly. He invested heavily in streaming technology and content creation while his competitors were still focused on physical media and traditional distribution models. But Hastings also demonstrated Machiavellian pragmatism. When Netflix announced it was splitting its DVD and streaming services into separate companies with different pricing structures, customers rebelled furiously. A purely Sun Tzu approach might have suggested waiting for better conditions or finding a more harmonious way to make the transition. Instead, Hastings made the hard decision to absorb short-term customer anger and financial losses because he understood that Netflix's long-term survival depended on transitioning away from DVDs as quickly as possible. The decision was wildly unpopular at the time, but it positioned Netflix to dominate the streaming era while competitors like Blockbuster collapsed. Consider how Oprah Winfrey built her media empire. She understood that her audience needed to perceive her as authentic, relatable, and trustworthy. Every decision about her public image, from her choice of topics to discuss, to how she dressed, to which product she endorsed, was carefully calculated to maintain this perception. This wasn't manipulation but strategic authenticity. She genuinely cared about her audience, but she also understood that expressing this care in ways her audience could recognize and relate to was crucial for building the platform that allowed her to make a positive impact. The Machiavellian approach also emphasizes timing and opportunity. He believed that successful leaders must be ready to act decisively when circumstances align in their favor, even if this means taking significant risks. This contrasts with the Sun Tzu approach of creating ideal conditions before acting. Mark Cuban demonstrates this principle consistently. Throughout his career, he's shown a willingness to make bold moves when he sees opportunities, from selling his first company Broadcast.com at the height of the dot-com boom to making unconventional investments on Shark Tank. He doesn't wait for perfect conditions. Instead, he analyzes situations quickly and acts when he believes the potential rewards justify the risks. Another example of this synthesis appears in how Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft's culture and strategy. When he became CEO, Microsoft was seen as a declining technology company that had missed the mobile revolution and was losing relevance in a cloud-first world. His approach combined Eastern and Western strategic thinking brilliantly. The Sun Tzu elements showed up in his emphasis on long-term cultural transformation. Rather than trying to compete directly with Apple and Google in mobile devices where Microsoft was already behind, he repositioned the company to focus on cloud computing and productivity software where Microsoft had inherent advantages. He also emphasized collaboration and learning over the competitive internal culture that had previously defined Microsoft. The Machiavellian elements appeared in his willingness to make difficult decisions quickly. He ended Microsoft's Windows Phone project, laying off thousands of employees, because he recognized that continuing to pour resources into a failing mobile strategy would prevent the company from focusing on areas where it could win. He also partnered with former competitors like Apple, integrating Microsoft Office with iOS devices, because he understood that Microsoft's success no longer depended on controlling the entire technology ecosystem. The results speak for themselves. Under Nadella's leadership, Microsoft's market value increased from around $300 billion to over $2 trillion, making it one of the world's most valuable companies again. Understanding your environment, the foundation of strategic success. Both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli emphasized the crucial importance of understanding your environment completely before attempting to change your position within it. However, they approached this understanding from different angles that modern practitioners can combine for maximum effectiveness. Sun Tzu's approach to environmental awareness focuses on understanding the broader ecosystem and long-term trends. He wrote about the importance of understanding terrain, weather, timing, and the interconnected relationships between all elements in your strategic environment. This translates to modern contexts as understanding market trends, technological developments, cultural shifts, and the complex relationships between different stakeholders in your field. Amazon's expansion strategy demonstrates this principle perfectly. Before entering new markets, Amazon conducts exhaustive research into local regulations, consumer preferences, logistics infrastructure, and competitive landscapes. When they launched in India, they didn't simply copy their American model. Instead, they adapted their approach to accommodate local payment preferences, delivery challenges, and regulatory requirements. This thorough environmental understanding allowed them to build a dominant position in one of the world's most complex retail markets. Machiavelli's environmental awareness focused more on understanding power structures, individual motivations, and immediate political dynamics. He emphasized the importance of knowing who holds real influence, what motivates key players, and how decisions actually get made versus how they appear to be made. This shows up clearly in how successful entrepreneurs navigate investor relationships. They don't just focus on having good business metrics and compelling pitches. They also research individual investors' backgrounds, investment philosophies, personal interests, and decision-making processes. They understand which investors have real influence in funding decisions and what factors beyond pure financial returns might motivate investment decisions. Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn's founder, exemplified this approach when building his company. He didn't just focus on creating a good professional networking platform. He also invested heavily in understanding how different stakeholders in the professional world actually make decisions about career moves, hiring, and business relationships. This deep understanding of professional power dynamics allowed LinkedIn to position itself as an essential tool for career advancement and business development. The art of positioning, creating advantage before competition begins. One of Sun Tzu's most powerful concepts is the idea that superior positioning makes victory inevitable. This isn't about avoiding competition, but about choosing your battles so carefully that you enter each competitive situation with overwhelming advantages. The principle shows up clearly in how successful people choose their careers and business opportunities. Rather than simply pursuing what they're passionate about or what seems most immediately profitable, they look for intersections where their unique strengths meet underserved market needs. Consider how Tim Cook positioned himself to eventually become Apple's CEO. He didn't try to compete with Steve Jobs on product vision or marketing genius, areas where Jobs was virtually unbeatable. Instead, Cook focused on operations, supply chain management, and organizational efficiency, areas that were crucial to Apple's success, but where Jobs was less personally involved. By becoming indispensable in these areas, Cook positioned himself as the natural choice to lead Apple when Jobs stepped down. This principle also applies to how people position themselves within existing organizations. The most successful employees don't just try to do their assigned jobs well. They identify problems or opportunities that leadership cares about but hasn't yet addressed effectively, then position themselves as the solution to those problems. Sheryl Sandberg's career trajectory illustrates this perfectly. At Google, she didn't try to compete with the technical founders on engineering excellence. Instead, she positioned herself as the person who could translate Google's technical innovations into sustainable business models. This made her invaluable to Google's growth and positioned her perfectly for her eventual role as Facebook COO, where her ability to build scalable business operations was exactly what Mark Zuckerberg needed. The timing of action, when to move and when to wait. The question of timing represents one of the key differences between Eastern and Western strategic thinking, and understanding both approaches gives modern practitioners a more complete toolkit for decision-making. Sun Tzu generally advocated for patience and thorough preparation. His philosophy suggests that rushing into action before conditions are optimal often leads to unnecessary struggles and suboptimal outcomes. This approach emphasizes building strength, gathering information, and waiting for the right moment when success becomes much more likely. Warren Buffett's investment philosophy perfectly embodies this approach. He's famous for holding large cash positions for years, waiting for the right opportunities to present themselves. Rather than feeling pressure to invest constantly, he waits for situations where he has high confidence in positive outcomes. This patience has allowed him to make some of the most profitable investments in history, buying quality companies at significant discounts during market downturns when other investors are panicking. Machiavelli, on the other hand, emphasized the importance of acting decisively when opportunities arise, even if conditions aren't perfect. He argued that hesitation often causes leaders to miss crucial windows of opportunity and that bold action can sometimes create favorable conditions rather than waiting for them to appear naturally. This principle shows up in how successful entrepreneurs handle market timing. Many of today's most successful companies were launched during economic downturns or periods of uncertainty when conventional wisdom suggested waiting for better conditions. Airbnb was founded during the 2008 financial crisis when travel and hospitality industries were struggling. Rather than waiting for economic recovery, the founders recognized that the economic pressure was actually creating their opportunity. People needed extra income from renting out spare rooms, and travelers were looking for cheaper accommodation options. The economic crisis that made others hesitant to start new ventures actually created the perfect conditions for Airbnb's business model. The key insight is that both approaches have their place depending on your situation and resources. If you're in a strong position with significant resources, the Sun Tzu approach of patient preparation and waiting for optimal conditions often makes sense. If you're in a weaker position or facing rapidly changing circumstances, the Machiavellian approach of bold action to create opportunities might be more appropriate. Building alliances, the power of strategic relationships. Both strategic traditions recognize that sustainable success rarely comes from individual effort alone. However, they approach relationship building and alliance formation from different perspectives that complement each other effectively. Sun Tzu's approach to alliances emphasizes mutual benefit and long-term stability. He believed that the strongest alliances come from aligning interests so completely that all parties benefit from each other's success. This creates relationships that can withstand temporary setbacks and changing circumstances because the fundamental incentives remain aligned. The tech industry provides numerous examples of this principle in action. Instead of trying to build every component of their products internally, successful tech companies often form strategic partnerships that benefit all parties involved. Apple's relationship with suppliers like Foxconn demonstrates this principle. Rather than simply demanding the lowest prices, Apple works with suppliers to improve manufacturing processes, quality standards, and worker conditions. This creates relationships where suppliers are invested in Apple's success because they profit from the partnership's growth. Machiavelli's approach to alliances focuses more on power dynamics and the reality that relationships often involve competing interests that must be managed carefully. He recognized that even beneficial alliances require ongoing attention to maintain balance and prevent any party from gaining too much leverage over others. This shows up clearly in how successful business leaders manage board relationships, investor connections, and key employee retention. They understand that maintaining beneficial relationships requires ongoing attention to each party's changing needs and interests. They don't assume that once a beneficial relationship is established, it will continue automatically. Elon Musk's approach to managing Tesla's relationship with traditional automotive suppliers illustrates this principle. While building beneficial partnerships with some suppliers, he also invested heavily in developing internal capabilities for critical components like batteries and software. This prevented Tesla from becoming overly dependent on any single relationship while still benefiting from external partnerships where they made sense. Adapting to change, flexibility within consistency. One of the most challenging aspects of strategic thinking is maintaining consistent direction while adapting to changing circumstances. Both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli offered insights into this challenge that remain relevant today. Sun Tzu's approach emphasizes maintaining consistent principles while adapting tactics to changing situations. He used the metaphor of water, which maintains its essential nature while taking the shape of whatever container it encounters. This means having core values and objectives that don't change while remaining flexible about how you achieve them. This principle shows up clearly in how successful companies maintain their culture and mission while adapting their business models to changing markets. Netflix provides an excellent example. Throughout multiple major transitions from DVD by mail to streaming to content creation, the company maintained consistent core principles about using technology to give customers convenient access to entertainment content. However, their specific business model, revenue streams, and operational focus changed dramatically as market conditions evolved. Machiavelli's approach to adaptation focuses more on reading changing power dynamics and adjusting your position accordingly. He emphasized that what works in one situation might be counterproductive in another, and effective leaders must be prepared to change their approach based on circumstances. This shows up in how successful political and business leaders adjust their communication styles and priorities based on their audience and situation. They maintain consistent core beliefs and objectives but express them differently depending on who they're addressing and what outcomes they're trying to achieve. Barack Obama's political career illustrates this principle effectively. Throughout his rise from community organizer to president, he maintained consistent core values around opportunity, equality, and democratic participation. However, his specific policy priorities, communication strategies, and coalition-building approaches evolved significantly as he moved from local to national politics and faced different challenges in each role. The psychology of influence, understanding human motivation. Both strategic traditions recognize that success often depends more on understanding human psychology than on having the best product, service, or idea. However, they approached human motivation from different cultural perspectives that modern practitioners can combine effectively. Sun Tzu's approach to influence emphasizes understanding what people truly need and want, then positioning yourself as the solution to those needs. This creates influence that feels natural and beneficial to those being influenced because it genuinely serves their interests. This principle shows up clearly in how successful salespeople and marketers approach their work. Rather than trying to convince people to want what they're selling, they first understand what people already want, then demonstrate how their product or service fulfills those existing desires. The success of companies like Tesla illustrates this principle. Rather than trying to convince people that electric vehicles were inherently better, Tesla first understood that many consumers wanted cars that were both environmentally responsible and high performance. They then created products that fulfilled both desires simultaneously, making the choice to buy a Tesla feel like a natural decision rather than a compromise. Machiavelli's approach to influence recognizes the importance of understanding people's fears, ambitions, and social pressures in addition to their stated preferences. He understood that people often make decisions based on emotions and social dynamics rather than purely rational analysis. This shows up in how successful leaders communicate during times of change or uncertainty. They don't just present logical arguments for why their proposed changes make sense. They also address people's emotional concerns, acknowledge the social dynamics that might create resistance, and provide ways for people to maintain their status and relationships while adapting to new circumstances. When Reed Hastings led Netflix through its transition from DVDs to streaming, he didn't just explain the business logic behind the change. He also acknowledged that many customers were emotionally attached to the DVD service and felt frustrated by having to learn new technology. The company invested heavily in making the streaming experience as user-friendly as possible and provided extensive customer support during the transition. Risk management, preparing for what could go wrong. Both strategic traditions emphasize the importance of preparing for adverse scenarios, but they approach risk management from different angles that complement each other effectively. Sun Tzu's approach to risk management emphasizes thorough preparation and positioning yourself so that even if things go wrong, you can still achieve acceptable outcomes. This means having multiple options available and avoiding situations where your success depends on everything going perfectly. This principle shows up clearly in how successful investors and entrepreneurs structure their ventures. Rather than putting all their resources into a single opportunity, they diversify across multiple investments or revenue streams. This doesn't guarantee that every individual investment will succeed, but it ensures that their overall portfolio can weather individual failures. Warren Buffett's investment approach exemplifies this principle. He focuses on companies with strong competitive advantages, conservative debt levels, and multiple ways to generate returns. This means that even if the overall economy struggles or specific industries face challenges, his investments are likely to maintain their value and continue generating returns. Building sustainable advantage, creating long-term success. The ultimate goal of strategic thinking is creating advantages that persist over time and continue generating value even as circumstances change. Both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli offered insights into how to build sustainable success, though they approached it from different perspectives. Sun Tzu's approach to sustainable advantage emphasizes building fundamental strengths that remain valuable regardless of changing circumstances. This means developing capabilities, relationships, and positions that create value in multiple different scenarios. This principle shows up clearly in how successful individuals build their careers. Rather than focusing only on skills that are valuable in their current job or industry, they develop broader capabilities that transfer across different roles and situations. Oprah Winfrey's career development illustrates this principle perfectly. Rather than just becoming excellent at hosting television shows, she developed broader skills in understanding human psychology, building authentic relationships with audiences, and identifying content that resonates with people's deeper needs and aspirations. These skills allowed her to succeed across multiple media formats and build a business empire that extends far beyond television. Machiavelli's approach to sustainable advantage focuses more on understanding and adapting to changing power dynamics. He recognized that what creates advantage in one era might become a liability in another, so sustainable success requires constantly updating your approach while maintaining your core position. This shows up in how successful companies reinvent themselves while maintaining their essential identity. They don't cling to specific products or business models that made them successful in the past, but they do preserve the underlying capabilities and relationships that created their original success. Microsoft's transformation under Satya Nadella provides an excellent example. The company moved away from its traditional focus on operating systems and productivity software installed on individual computers. Instead, it embraced cloud computing, subscription services, and cross-platform compatibility. This represented a fundamental change in business model, but it preserved Microsoft's core strengths in enterprise software and developer relationships while adapting them to new technological realities. The integration of wisdom, applying these principles today. The most powerful approach to modern strategic thinking integrates insights from both Eastern and Western traditions while adapting them to contemporary circumstances. This doesn't mean trying to apply ancient principles directly to modern situations, but rather understanding the underlying human and organizational dynamics that make these insights timeless. The first step in applying these principles is developing accurate self-awareness. Both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli emphasize that strategic success begins with honest assessment of your own capabilities, resources, and limitations. This means regularly examining not just what you're good at, but also what you're not good at, what resources you have available, and what constraints you're operating under. Many people skip this step because honest self-assessment can be uncomfortable. It requires acknowledging areas where you're not as capable as you'd like to be and limitations that might prevent you from pursuing certain opportunities. However, strategic decisions based on inaccurate self-assessment almost always lead to disappointing results. The second step is developing comprehensive awareness of your environment. This includes understanding the people you're dealing with, the systems and processes that govern your field, the trends that are shaping future opportunities, and the resources and constraints that affect everyone in your situation. This environmental awareness must be ongoing rather than a one-time analysis. Markets change, relationships evolve, new technologies emerge, and political and economic conditions shift constantly. Strategic thinkers develop systems for continuously updating their understanding of their environment rather than making decisions based on outdated information. The third step is developing multiple options for achieving your objectives. Both strategic traditions emphasize that having only one path to success makes you vulnerable to circumstances beyond your control. Successful strategists always have backup plans and alternative approaches available. This doesn't mean being indecisive or constantly changing direction. Rather, it means structuring your approach so that if your primary strategy encounters obstacles, you can shift to alternative methods without starting over completely. The fourth step is timing your actions carefully. This requires balancing the Sun Tzu principle of thorough preparation with the Machiavellian understanding that opportunities often require bold action even when conditions aren't perfect. The key insight is that different situations call for different approaches to timing. When you're in a strong position with abundant resources, taking time for careful preparation usually makes sense. When you're in a competitive situation where delay might cause you to miss opportunities, more aggressive timing might be appropriate. The fifth step is building and maintaining strategic relationships. Success in complex modern environments almost always requires cooperation with others, but these relationships must be structured to remain beneficial for all parties as circumstances change. This means regularly evaluating your key relationships to ensure they're still mutually beneficial and making adjustments when necessary to maintain alignment of interests. It also means being proactive about building new relationships before you need them rather than waiting until you're in crisis situations. The continuous journey of strategic development. Understanding and applying strategic principles is not a destination, but an ongoing process of development and refinement. Both Sun Tzu and Machiavelli recognize that the world is constantly changing, and effective strategists must continuously update their understanding and approaches. This means treating every outcome, whether successful or unsuccessful, as a learning opportunity. When your strategies succeed, analyze what factors contributed to that success so you can replicate them in future situations. When they don't succeed, examine what you might have misunderstood about the situation or where your execution could have been improved. The most successful strategic thinkers also recognize that mastery comes from consistent application over time rather than trying to achieve perfect understanding before taking action. They start applying these principles in low-risk situations to build experience and confidence, then gradually take on more complex and high-stakes challenges as their capabilities develop. This approach requires patience with the learning process while maintaining urgency about taking action when opportunities arise. It means being willing to make mistakes and learn from them while also being careful not to make mistakes that could have catastrophic consequences. The integration of Eastern and Western strategic thinking also requires cultural humility and openness to different perspectives. These traditions emerge from different historical circumstances and cultural values, and their insights are most powerful when adapted thoughtfully to contemporary context rather than applied mechanically. This means understanding the underlying principles that make these approaches effective while being creative about how to express them in modern situations. It also means recognizing that what works in one cultural or organizational context might need to be modified for different environments. The ultimate goal is developing what we might call strategic wisdom, the ability to quickly assess complex situations, identify the most promising opportunities, understand the key factors that will determine success or failure, and take effective action while remaining adaptable to changing circumstances. This wisdom comes from combining theoretical understanding with practical experience, learning from both your own efforts and observing how others succeed or fail in similar situations. It requires developing intuitive understanding of human psychology, organizational dynamics, and systemic forces while maintaining analytical clarity about specific tactics and implementation details. The journey toward strategic mastery is lifelong because the world continues evolving and new challenges constantly emerge that require fresh thinking and adaptation. However, the fundamental insights about human nature, power dynamics, competitive positioning, and effective action that Sun Tzu and Machiavelli identified remain remarkably relevant because they're based on enduring aspects of how individuals and organizations interact in complex environments. By understanding and integrating these Eastern and Western approaches to strategy, modern practitioners can develop more complete and effective approaches to achieving their objectives while contributing positively to the communities and organizations they're part of. The goal is not just personal success, but creating value and positive change in ways that benefit everyone involved. If you've made it this far in our exploration of these timeless strategic principles, that tells me something important about you. You're not just looking for quick fixes or simple answers. You're serious about understanding how power, influence, and strategic thinking really work in our complex modern world. You're ready to do the difficult work of honest self-assessment, careful planning, and patient execution that real success requires. The principles we've discussed today aren't just academic concepts. They're practical tools that you can start applying immediately in whatever situation you're facing right now. Whether you're building a business, advancing your career, improving your relationships, or working toward any other meaningful goal, these strategic insights can help you make better decisions and achieve better outcomes. But understanding these principles intellectually is just the beginning. The real transformation comes from consistently applying them in your daily life, learning from your results, and continuously refining your approach based on what you discover. So here's my challenge to you. If you're truly committed to taking your strategic thinking to the next level, if you're ready to start applying these ancient wisdom traditions to create modern success, comment "Strategic Master" below. Let me know that you're serious about this journey and ready to put in the work required to develop real strategic capabilities. Because here's the truth: the people who succeed at the highest levels aren't necessarily the smartest or most talented. They're the ones who understand how to think strategically, build effective relationships, position themselves advantageously, and take decisive action when opportunities arise. These are learnable skills, but they require commitment and practice to develop. The choice is yours. You can treat this as interesting information and go back to making decisions based on emotion, impulse, or conventional wisdom. Or you can begin the journey of developing true strategic mastery that will serve you throughout your life and help you create the kind of impact and success that most people only dream about. Comment "Strategic Master" if you're ready to begin this transformation. Let's build a community of people who are serious about applying these timeless principles to create extraordinary results in our modern world.